what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And, pardon me, and aloha America. Welcome to the show today. It's Tuesday, May 15th, 2018. Getting into the week here, about halfway through the month, and boy, it's a busy news day. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, whatever. So let's get right on into it. The situation in Israel and Gaza is having repercussions all over the world. Most of the world is appalled at what the government of Israel is doing, and even worse, efforts by the government of Israel and the government of the United States and the U.S. corporate media to try and spin this story in Israel's favor are just falling flat on their face. This is clearly a jump the shark moment, and we're seeing headlines like Embassy Baptized in Blood, the Embassy of Doom, and a lot of people knew this was going to happen. A lot of world leaders went to Donald Trump and said, do not do this. This is going to escalate the situation in the Mideast. And Trump ignored them because Sheldon Adelson and Netanyahu wanted the embassy moved. And Trump said, yes, sir, yes, sir. And he went ahead and did it. And it was kind of, well, it was bad optics because a lot of the news coverage of the opening of the U.S. Embassy was split screen showing the violence down there on the border with Gaza, where the snipers just continued to fire using these expanding bullets at these unarmed protesters. And I think a lot of people knew this was going to be bad optics because Israel extended invitations to all 86 countries that have diplomatic missions in Israel. Less than 40 of them actually showed up. The rest just stayed away. They didn't want to have any part of this. Up in Israel, people were just out there literally cheering, burn them, shoot them, kill them. And again, more case of bad optics. How does this look to the rest of the world? And so a lot of people are looking at that stark contrast of, all the prettiness around the embassy and stage management and lighting and flags and bunting, and just that short distance away, all that bloodshed, misery, death. Now, Gilad Erdan, who's Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs and Hasbara, tried to justify the Gaza massacre by calling the Palestinians Nazis. So they're going all the way back again to whatever it is that was supposed to have happened in World War II. Oh, they're Nazis. Whoever Israel wants to destroy, oh, they're a Nazi. Iran are Nazis. The Palestinians are Nazis. The Iraqis were Nazis. The Syrians are Nazis. Getting tired of hearing about it. And he's joined the chorus of voices trying to say that these weren't demonstrators, but they were an armed, well, not armed, but they were a force attempting to breach the border with Israel, goaded on by Hamas. That's the official story. They weren't actually protesters and demonstrators. They were an invasion force. And anybody looking at the video can see that that's certainly not the case. Israel is maintaining they're in a state of war with Gaza. They're defending themselves. We're the victims. No, Israel's not the victim. Israel's the aggressor. Amnesty International is calling this a horror show, and it absolutely was. Now, Donald Trump, the obedient Israeli puppet in the White House, is out there saying, Israel has a right to defend itself. This is all the fault of Hamas. Hamas, was sending this crowd to the border to break on through and invade Israel. So, let's see what Donald Trump is trying to sell us here. He's trying to sell us the idea that Israel, armed by the United States with the most modern lethal weapons of war and in possession of nuclear weapons, feels threatened by Palestinians throwing a rock. I think it's time we mandate drug testing for the president. and for all of Congress. Let's be inclusive here, as the PC people would like to say. Nobody's buying that. And the harder the corporate media and the U.S. government try and justify the unjustifiable, the worse they look. They're taking down their own credibility with this. Over at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, they're out there saying snipers shooting at unarmed people from 100 meters from inside fortified positions isn't a clash. And that's what's happening. Israel sent snipers down there. They put up fortified positions, and they just sit there shooting at the Palestinian protesters. That's not a clash. It's not a conflict, and it's not a war. It is a massacre. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network. And we're talking about how Israel just basically opened fire on these Palestinians whose only goal, they want their homes back that were taken during the creation of Israel, and that was promised to them by the United Nations. Israel's membership at the United Nations carries with it two conditions. The first condition is a Palestinian right of return to their lands that were stolen 70 years ago. The second condition is if the Palestinians of their own free will choose not to return, that Israel will compensate them for those properties. Israel has complied with neither one of those conditions. And the Palestinians are understandably angry. It has been 70 years. Now, do you remember back when they were building the case for the war against Iraq? Oh, Saddam is killing the Kurds. He's killing his own people inside his own country. And then this constant press for more war in Syria. Oh, Assad is killing his own people inside his own country. The U.S. tends to invade countries whose leaders are killing their own people, except, of course, for Israel. For Israel, it's okay. Kill all the Palestinians you want. It doesn't really matter. But if any other country was shooting civilians like Israel, the U.S. would have invaded by now. So, needless to say, over on Twitter, there's been a firestorm of condemnation and protest. First of all, the bad optics of the U.S. Embassy opening during the Gaza massacre. I mean, that was very provocative to open that embassy on Israel's Independence Day, one day before the Nakba Day. That was very provocative. Needless to say, the Gaza hospitals are completely overrun. The smell of blood is everywhere. They're out of beds. They're already calling it Bloody Monday. That's how it's going to go into the history books, at least in the independent media. Bloody Monday. So the Israelis are out there, and the Palestinians are throwing rocks at them, which can't possibly reach those fortified positions 100 meters away. And Israel is responding with those expanding bullets, steel pellets, fire bombs, and tear gas. That's not a clash. That is a massacre. Now, 10 Palestinian journalists have been attacked by the Israeli forces. Israel is trying to keep what's going on in Gaza away from the rest of the world. They failed miserably. Too many people with cell phones. People were able to get past the Israeli army jamming of the cellular system. Too many foreign journalists in there, and Israel doesn't dare shoot them. So it did get out, and people are going to remember that. Israeli forces have killed 2 more Palestinians today. Now, Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan is saying that it's time to resume targeted killings of Hamas leaders. They basically want to start assassinating the legitimate government of Gaza. So there's going to be more blood yet. Now, the reaction around the world is, again, almost universal condemnation. People are saying it's time to hold Israel accountable for all these murders of Palestinian protesters. And don't forget, the day before this all happened, Israel launched 20 rockets into Gaza. They were just really trying to provoke them. And it was kind of ironic watching the opening of the U.S. Embassy, where U.S. representatives were saying about how their actions will bring peace, while all these Palestinians were being killed. But why is Israel above international law? That's a question everybody needs to ask themselves. We know that Israel has an iron lock on the U.S. government. We're under foreign puppet rule. And nobody should be above the law. No nation should be above the law. That was supposed to be the purpose of the United Nations, to basically enforce international law and deal with rogue states. Now, over in Turkey, Deputy Premier Bekir Bozdağ said, the U.S. is just as responsible for the Gaza massacre as Israel, because of the provocation of moving the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem. And it's not bringing comfort, security, stability, and peace to the region, as the speeches were saying. It increased the existing discomfort, insecurity, instability, crisis, and conflicts. And there'll probably be many more unforeseen negativities coming out of this. Now, yesterday, Turkey recalled their ambassadors to the United States and Israel, and today, Turkey told Israel's ambassador to Turkey to leave the country. So this has stirred up a hornet's nest. Story out of Russia Today: America's Jerusalem embassy for mass murder, occupation, and wider war. And they point out the irony here, that embassies are supposed to symbolize diplomacy and peace. And instead, the U.S. embassy has been baptized in blood. And on the anniversary of one of the most shameful episodes of ethnic cleansing and dispossession over the past century, the 1948 Nakba, which means catastrophe for the Palestinians. And the U.S. government is brazenly siding with the heirs of that historic violence. And as the world judges the actions of the government of Israel, they will also judge the actions of the government of the United States of America. Now, it's come on out that Great Britain is selling a lot of weapons to Israel, including equipment for snipers. So those rifles that the Israelis are using to kill the Palestinians may have been acquired from Great Britain. Now, the gun grabbers like to say that the providers of the weapons share the guilt with those who pull the trigger. If we accept that premise, then the blood of the Palestinians is on the hands of the government of Great Britain. Now, the U.S. media is trying to whitewash all this, poor Israel, they're such a victim, they're so helpless there with their 400 nuclear warheads. And over at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, they're pointing out how CNN is trying to spin all this. And they're talking about, 2,400 people have been injured. They don't mention Palestinian. They just go with people to make it look like it's balanced on both sides. They describe what's going on in the border as a clash. We already dealt with that one. No, it's not a clash. And needless to say, the Twitterverse is outraged over the corporate media's handling of this situation. CNN's brand is so badly damaged. The other day, Alex Jones was actually saying CNN may change their name because their brand is so damaged right now. And over on the Twitterverse, they're saying the corporate media is just totally uncritical of anything the government of Israel does. Now, the United Nations put together a draft statement on Israel's use of force against the protesters in the Gaza border. They might as well have not bothered, because Nikki Haley jumped up and went, veto, 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 we veto, 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 veto. So once again, Israel is above international law. Then she went on to say, no country would act with more restraint than Israel has. Then she went on to say, there was absolutely no connection between the movement of the embassy and what happened down on the Gaza border, because Hamas was inciting violence against Israel, long before the embassy move. By the way, not one Israeli has been injured, let alone killed, in all of this. All the deaths are on one side. Every single one. Over at Sky News, there was a bit of a kerfuffle where diplomatic editor Dominic Weghorn and an Israeli scholar, Dr. Mordecai Keter, got into the discussion about the status of Jerusalem, with Dominic basically saying, the UN said Jerusalem is an independent city. It's divided into 4 areas representing the 4 major religions for whom that city is a holy place. And East Jerusalem is supposed to belong to the Palestinians. And Dr. Kedar, who's also a former intelligence officer, accused Waghorn of thinking like an Englishman and saying Palestinians have absolutely no claim whatsoever to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, apparently 500 Palestinians have been detained over Facebook posts. Israel is now monitoring all social media, and any post that glorifies Palestinian martyrs, discloses Israeli crimes, supports resistance, or even mentions the words and phrases including martyr and intifada as incitement of terror. And they're just locking these people up. Israel has become a pure dictatorship under the current government. In Washington, D.C., the group If Not Now blocked traffic outside the Trump Hotel to protest the embassy move. So this is not going over with the rest of the world at all. Now, up in Dublin, Ireland, the mayor is urging a boycott of next year's Eurovision event. See, the way the rules work, Israel won the Eurovision contest this year with a song about women's rights, a little bit of irony there for you, and so they have the right to host Eurovision next year. And the mayor of Dublin is saying the world should just stay away after what happened on Bloody Monday. Max Blumenthal is out there pointing out that Israel's toxic influence is what's responsible for the U.S. extreme policy in the Middle East. And he's absolutely right. And Blumenthal has a film coming out, supposed to come out tomorrow, called Killing Gaza. And it's a documentary about the 2014 Israeli attack on the Palestinian territory. But yeah, we've just gotten a huge demonstration here. The U.S. government doesn't stand for human rights. It stands for might makes right. And it's clearly under the total control of Israel right now. We are an occupied nation ourselves. That's probably the reason why those Israeli security companies are teaching U.S. police to treat the American people the way the IDF is treating the Palestinians. Are we going to start seeing volleys of expanding bullets flying toward us somewhere in the future? Getting to Iran, there's a question being raised. This is over at the American Conservative. Was there ever really an Iranian nuclear weapons program? And their conclusion, after looking at all the information, is that it was an Israeli and MEK propaganda situation. More about that when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this question. Did Iran ever actually have a nuclear weapons program? Now, we do know they looked into it, but they quit in 2003. And as part of the groundwork for the P5+1 deal, they turned over all that information to the IAEA. And that's what Netanyahu had on his dog and pony show. None of that was new. It was all 15 years out of date. So the American conservative has concluded that all of this story about a nuclear weapons program was an Israeli MEK disinformation operation. Now, there are 2 points you need to remember. First of all, Israel has been screaming that Iran is weeks away from a nuclear bomb for the last 30 years. MEK is a terrorist group, and Israel used MEK to propaganda launder the so-called laptop of death. This was a laptop which supposedly had been stolen from an Iranian nuclear weapons expert, and it was chock full of all kinds of diagrams and technical information that certainly looked like somebody was getting ready to build a bomb. But then real nuclear weapons experts looked at it and said, this stuff is junk. It's a prop. Somebody went out on the internet, they just web searched for anything about nuclear weapons, and they grabbed everything and stuffed it on the laptop. And then Israel gave it to MEK, and MEK gave it to the world and said, see, Iran is building a bomb. And here's the irony. Trump is talking about regime change in Iran. Guess who he wants to put in as the new government? MEK. That's going to make the Iranian people very, very happy. Now, Tehran is out there saying that if the P4+1 deal collapses, or if it's brought down by the United States, which is already applying pressure to the other members of the P4+1 to get out of the deal, that Tehran is ready to actually start a nuclear weapons program. And apparently they've already contacted China for technical assistance. Trump is determined to get us into a war with Iran. Why? Well, because Sheldon Adelson and Netanyahu want him to. Because the private central banks want Iran enslaved to a private central bank. Because the U.S. government wants Iran's oil to be sold only for U.S. dollars. Now, over in Iraq, there's been a bit of a surprise. You remember Muqtada al-Sadr? Used to hear a lot about him. And then he sort of kind of got sidelined. But while the election results aren't final, it looks like he won the Iraqi election. And that was a real surprise to a lot of people. And that probably means that the United States is going to be asked to leave Iraq, which they won't. And Muqtada al-Sadr better be wearing his Kevlar undies. More evidence has surfaced inside Syria that ISIS and the terrorists were using Israeli weapons, and not just a few, quite a huge pile. I've seen some of the pictures that were coming on out of there. And it includes grenades, RPGs, mortars, and apparently some World War II era machine guns. And landmines. Huge amount of stuff out there. And now you know why ISIS and Al-Qaeda never attacked Israel. Israel was their sponsor. Israel was their boss. Once again, we are getting warnings from various intelligence services that the U.S. government is planning another false flag gas attack in Syria as a prelude to a new military escalation there. They're just going to walk back in and do it again and say, yeah, Assad's gassing his people. Forget about all those times it turned out we were wrong. Forget about Saddam's nuclear weapons. This time you can trust us. This time, we're telling you the truth. And you've got to be afraid, because if we don't get Assad, he's going to start dropping chemical weapons all over Disneyland. So we are headed in a bad direction. There's just no two ways about it. And I know Putin is trying to keep things toned down, to keep it from becoming a wider regional or global war. But the forces that want that wider war are numerous and well-funded. They're totally in control. But once they get a regional war going, they're not going to be able to control it. It's going to spin out of control. Good example would be World War I, which began between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. And then it spun out of control, and everybody said, well, Germany's got to be the enemy now because they're an economic threat to Britain and the United States, and it just spiraled out of control. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And rather disturbing story coming out of the Independent in Great Britain. Apparently, Ivanka Trump pushed for her father to bomb Syria, according to diplomatic sources. And there was a cable briefing to Theresa May and Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson by Britain's ambassador to Washington, Sir Kim Darroch, who said Ivanka was influential in bringing about the bombings. Well, I don't remember Ivanka's name being on the ballot in 2016, but everybody ought to remember this very clearly, because there are rumblings that Trump may try and establish a family dynasty, and that Ivanka may run for the White House at some point down the future. Just like we're hearing the Clintons are trying to groom Chelsea for a run at the White House. So everybody remember, Ivanka's a war hawk. Now the U.S. Army is preparing to send Stryker vehicles to Europe. These are somewhat different because they're equipped with rockets, with helicopter and drone killing rockets. And they're getting ready to basically produce 144 of these to counter Russian aggression. They're back to pushing that one here again. Over at Express, also in Great Britain, MI5 is out there. Basically, the chief of MI5, Andrew Parker, is out there saying that Russia is threatening world peace with their unacceptable, aggressive acts. Really? Have you looked in a mirror lately? Russia's not the one who's committing the aggressive acts. The United States is. We're officially in 7 wars around the world, and who knows how many covert military actions. Remember, it took everybody by surprise we were in Niger. But Andrew Parker is out there denouncing Russia's flagrant breach of law to undermine international stability. Boy, there's a case of the pot calling the kettle black. It's the United States and its allies, its vassal states, France, Germany, and Great Britain, and it's Israel that are destabilizing the world. Basically, what he's actually saying is Russia refuses to do what we tell them to do anymore. You know, back when we'd succeeded in creating a monopolar world underneath the United States, Russia worked with us. We were all good friends. And then they dared take control of their private central bank. They dared run Russia's public currency as a public utility. And that is a threat that we cannot ignore. Anyway, that 19-kilometer bridge that Russia built to connect the Crimean Peninsula with mainland Russia has officially opened. They had a big celebration. A column of trucks went across, one of them being driven by Vladimir Putin himself to mark the occasion. So the bridge is now open, and Russia has now said that any country can use it. Anybody that wants to drive cargo or whatever into Russia to their end of the bridge, they're welcome to use it, which I think is a very generous thing to be doing. Over in North Korea, things are kind of flipping back and forth. Originally, North Korea had proposed talks with South Korea tomorrow, May 16th, and they were going to be talking about denuclearization and reunification. Then earlier this morning there was a report that North Korea canceled the talks because of the ongoing U.S. and South Korea military drills, which Kim Jong-un says is basically a continuation of the dress rehearsal for an invasion of North Korea. And he was upset about that. More recently, we're hearing that North Korea is threatening to pull out of the talks, but the talks may still be on. So that situation is very fluid and dynamic. Now, Bolton is out there demanding, as a precondition for anything else to happen, that Kim Jong-un dismantle all of North Korea's nuclear weapons and ship them to the United States. And then they'll talk about security assurances and financial investment. And it's a repeat of this Same old thing we've seen before. You do what we want first, then maybe we'll do something nice for you. Maybe. It's a bad habit the U.S. government has gotten into, and unfortunately they got it from the government of Israel, which plays that game a lot with its Mideast neighbors here. North Korea has announced their intention to join international efforts to ban all nuclear weapons tests, which sounds really good. The issue is going to be, well, first of all, there's not a lot of testing going on. It's moved from above ground and below ground testing into simulations in supercomputers. That's why countries are building these fantastically powerful supercomputers, in order to basically do simulations of a warhead detonation inside these machines where there's no radioactive fallout. Of course, the wild card in all of this remains Israel, which is a nuclear-armed state but refuses to acknowledge it. And there is evidence, it was called the Vela incident, that Israel test-fired a nuclear weapon along with South Africa. They were working in partnership at the time, down in the South Atlantic. Now, fortunately, the world is ringed with satellites that are keeping an eye on things. If anybody were to do an above-ground test, it would be instantly recognizable by that double-pulse optical signature. As far as underground tests, it's possible it could happen. Fox News, I'm really beginning to lose trust in them as well. I thought at least we had one news network that was at least sort of staying in the middle of all this, but they've drunk the Kool-Aid on China. In fact, this was Tucker Carlson. Came on with a rant against China. China is rising. It's a disaster for the world. It's a catastrophe potentially for the United States. It's by far the single biggest threat we face, no matter what they tell you. And Tucker Carlson's claim is that China is a threat militarily and economically. Well, they have a good military. They have a lot of people in uniform. And they're obviously a threat economically because they're a manufacturing powerhouse. And don't forget what led to the targeting of Germany in both World War I and World War II. It was seen as an economic threat to the established order. And I don't like the fact that we are seeing all this talk about needing to deal with China, because China is a nuclear-armed nation, and they do have rockets that will hit the U.S. mainland. It's really out of control. All right, let's turn to the domestic politics and look at the Sturm und Drang going on within, well, the FBI. And we're now dealing with these allegations that Comey and high-ranking officials used that fake news Christopher Steele dossier as the basis to obtain a FISA warrant to spy on former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. Now, if the warrant was obtained fraudulently, any information that they got would not be legally admissible. But if the goal was simply to have information to use against him in a more clandestine manner, then it really wouldn't matter. But the warrant gave the Bureau retroactive access to Page's emails so agents could spy on communications from when he was on the campaign. Now we're getting allegations that the FBI planted at least one spy on the Trump campaign to try and dig up dirt or any information about the campaign that could be potentially exploited by the Hillary campaign. So this is probably the most embarrassing incident in the history of the FBI since the exposure of COINTELPRO. Now, Robert Mueller, and by the way, have you noticed the corporate media is kind of pulling away from this whole Robert Mueller story? Because for the last year, they've been pounding the drum about Trump-Russia collusion, and now it looks like Mueller has just run out of any options. That's why he's over there with Stormy Daniels, trying to at least tarnish Trump for an extramarital affair with a porn star and a $130,000 payment, which to me suggests that Stormy Daniels was extorting Donald Trump, making her the villain and Trump the victim in this particular case. But it looks like Mueller is going to basically come up empty on this Trump-Russia collusion. We laughingly call it investigation. And those same TV news networks that have been breathlessly echoing everything coming out of his office for the last year, they don't want to deal with the embarrassment. So you can see them starting to distance themselves a little bit. Now, another significant development is that Donald Trump has made changes to his legal team. John Dowd and Ty Cobb, who were saying, let's just cooperate with Mueller and get it over, they're out. And Emmett Flood and Rudy Giuliani are in. They are very aggressive, combative lawyers. And the Washington Post says the signal is that Trump's team is moving to a war footing. And Trump is looking for a way to just shut this down and get it over with. It has gone on for way too long. There's no question about that. Meanwhile, Republicans in Congress and the Department of Justice are still clashing over that FBI source who aided the Mueller probe. The GOP wants to know who it is. They know it's an American. There's been a lot of speculation who it might be. The Department of Justice is out there saying, we can't reveal sources and methods, even to members of Congress with security clearances. And you're going to get the source murdered, and we just can't give it to you. I think the FBI source who aided the Mueller probe is the spy, and that's what they don't want to come on out. People are still talking about the fact that John Kerry did, in fact, violate the Logan Act, but nothing seems to be done about it. He should be prosecuted. Kerry went on out and conducted foreign policy without the permission of the State Department or the White House, and that is a crime. But again, we live in a nation where above a certain level, you are immune from prosecution no matter what you do. Now, there's a story that's coming on out now that people are starting to look at. This happened back in September 2016, where the FBI initiated contact with Oleg Deripaska, apparently to help structure a narrative of Russian involvement in the Trump campaign via Paul Manafort. In other words, they were trying to create the illusion of collusion, because they knew back then that they weren't going to find anything. But it was a setup from day one. It was absolutely a setup from day one. And you have to wonder why they are still so hot and bothered to get rid of Trump. He's giving them everything they wanted, except maybe the open borders. He hasn't touched the vaccine industry. The elections are still fraudulent. We're at war in at least 7 countries, probably more we don't know about. What more do they want from him? I think it's just out of spite. I think the entire deep state was behind Hillary Clinton, and they're throwing a tantrum that they failed because of those gosh darned American voters. They're just too dumb to know to vote for the people we want in office. That's why we have to rig the elections. We have to overcome the stupidity of the American people who want an outsider or somebody to represent them in the government. What a silly idea. What do you think this is, a democracy? Or even a republic? Over at the White House, there is a continuing issue over the constant leaks. Kellyanne Conway is furious over the recent leaks. And it looks like they're going to crack down. There may be staff changes. People who are suspected of leaking are going to be let go. And given the fact that the FBI had at least one spy inside the Trump campaign, I would sweep the White House for listening devices. And I assume they do that on a regular basis anyway. But don't forget, the FBI has access to the very best. And there are listening devices which will not give themselves away. Ever see a musical instrument called a theremin? It's a box with 2 antennas out of it, and you put your hands near it, and it makes these very weird tones. It was used for the soundtrack in Forbidden Planet. The same guy who invented that developed a listening device that didn't need any electricity and didn't emit any signals, so it couldn't be found. And all it really was a metal diaphragm in a frame, and it was hidden inside a piece of artwork that was presented to a U.S. diplomat by a delegation of school children. It was this beautiful, beautiful wood carving, so of course he hung it on the wall. And the way it worked was that the Soviets basically fired a microwave beam into the embassy at this piece of artwork at an angle. And then they set up a receiver where the reflected signal would come on out. And any words said within that room would vibrate that metal diaphragm and modulate that microwave beam, and they would have the conversation. So if there's one of those inside the White House, the regular security sweeps are not going to find it. Trump is out there basically saying the leakers are cowards and traitors. I don't know that they're cowards because it's risky doing what they're doing. I'm not sure it is technically treason, but it is certainly disloyal. And it betrays a problem with the White House staff, and it goes all the way back to when Trump took office, and he wanted to be magnanimous in victory, and he said all those Obama holdovers could stay, and he just assumed that they would be loyal to him. And that may be the way it works in business when a new boss comes on in, but it's not the way Washington, D.C. works. He should have scraped out that executive office building and just started new with people from outside the Beltway, people without compromising connections. And then he would have gotten a lot more done on his agenda. But we're getting an image now of a White House staff that is spending more time trying to stab each other in the back than it is trying to help Trump do what Trump needs to do. The indications, at least from where I sit, is the White House is in a state of minor chaos. And I think it is time for some staff changes. And it's time for Trump, who ran as an outsider president, to bring in some outsiders to try and get some things done. And he's got a little over 2 years left to do it, but he'd better start now. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones now to Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. Well, you asked the question, why are they still, quote, going after Trump when he's giving them everything they want? I'm going to, again, put the theory out there that it's the only theory that fits everything Trump. There never was a threat to Trump from the, quote, deep state or the Democrats or anyone else. This is all pure theater. When you apply that this was all planned, we're going to keep the people following you while you do our agenda by making them think that the enemy, of my enemy is my friend, and you continue our agenda. We'll make all this noise. Nobody's going to go to jail. Nobody's going to be arrested. There's going to be no major embarrassments to Israel. It fits every one of those scenarios right down to why is Jeff Sessions still there. It's the only theory that works. That there is no threat to Trump, never was a threat to Trump. This is all Washington theater to keep the conservatives supporting Trump while he sells us out.
Well, the only flaw with that theory is the assumption that all of Washington, D.C. is moving as a single unit and following a single plan, when the available evidence right now is that the federal government is badly factionalized and engaged in a massive cover-up of things that went on when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, when Obama was president, going all the way back to George Herbert Walker Bush. What we're seeing are factions who are basically fighting back and forth for more influence and control. And so your theory sounds plausible if we assume that everybody in Washington, D.C. was getting along with everybody else, and right now that's clearly not the case.
What we're being presented, but again, no matter what happens, nobody's arrested. Congress makes no progress against Hillary or the FBI or anything. Nothing happens. It's all just noise, and distractions. It's been too long now for this to have been going on without Trump firing Sessions So you're not going to do your job, you're out of here. Just the whole thing. If it's one big kabuki dance, which is my opinion, it fits everything. And all of the grandstanding, all of the noise, the threats, the subpoenas that never get anyone arrested. They just ignore Congress, and there's nobody's arrested for it. Come on, this is pushed way past credulity to be real.
Well, there are two things to keep in mind. What is holding the deep state together is a web of corruption and mutually assured destruction. If Hillary was saying it herself, if I go down, I'll take everybody else down with me. And that's why people who don't even like Hillary Clinton are working very hard to keep the lid on what was going on with the Clinton Foundation and that email server. The problem with Donald Trump is he's turning out to be somebody who can be very easily manipulated. He's apparently susceptible to flattery. We reported just earlier in the show, his daughter Ivanka apparently convinced him to bomb Syria. So that's not a sign of a strong leader. When your kid comes up and says, I think you should bomb Syria, and daddy says, well, okay, anything for my little darling.
But I think everything you just said actually proves my point.
Well, we're going to have to disagree. We're going to have to agree to disagree on this one. It's an interesting theory, but the basic flaw is you're assuming a federal government that is moving and operating as a single cohesive unit, and that is clearly not the case right now. Okay?
The agenda continues.
All right, we're going to take a station break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And a reminder that the Front Sight Academy promotion has been continued until June 2nd. And I know the spots here on the RBN are saying May 5th. It's now June 2nd. So you still have a chance to get in on this deal. It is a wonderful deal for anybody who's a shooting enthusiast. It would be a wonderful gift for anybody you know who's a shooting enthusiast. And frankly, if Claire and I were on the mainland, anywhere around Nevada, I would take this deal myself. Okay, that's how good it is. So you still have an opportunity to get on this. Let's talk about the economic news now. A lot of stuff going on there. Apparently, a Russian bank has now stepped in to help Venezuela get around U.S. sanctions on cryptocurrency. Now, last March, Washington prohibited trade in the petro in the U.S., with Trump calling the cryptocurrency a scam supporting a dictatorship, which is not true. He won his election. So Trump signed an executive order, banned all transactions related to provision of financing for and other dealings in by a United States person or within the United States any digital currency, digital coin, or digital token issued by Venezuela's government. This is a continuation of the U.S. economic war that the U.S. has been waging against Venezuela all the way back to the times of Hugo Chavez. Now, Maduro has vowed that despite the sanctions, Venezuela would continue pushing forward the domestic blockchain technology and make the petro one of the most solid and trustworthy cryptocurrencies in the world. And they've got the resources to possibly do it. And they're out there. They've offered India a 30% discount on oil if they will pay for it in the petro. And Venezuela is out there making other deals around there. So apparently, the petro can be traded for other currencies, including the Russian ruble. And that's how they're going to get around this. And what we're seeing here, because of all the sanctions, the U.S. thinks that it's punishing these other countries with all these sanctions. What it's actually doing is walling itself off from the rest of the global economy at a time when obviously we need foreign sources of materials and manufactured goods. Up in Switzerland, there's a new development going on, and you will not hear about this one on the corporate media. It's called the Wohlgeld Initiative, meaning more or less a referendum for sovereign money. And what this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for Switzerland to drop having a privately owned central bank and go back to a state central bank and honest money. So I can imagine the private central bankers are already up there in Switzerland saying, you can't do that. Private central banking is the natural order of things. No, it isn't. It's a scam. You know, Trump's out there talking about Venezuela's cryptocurrency being a scam. It's nothing compared to private central banking. Biggest scam in history. People are looking at the 2% inflation rate and wondering, is this the beginning of an inflationary cycle? And the answer is yes, but not because of the 2%. For one thing, that number is suspect. The United States calculates the rate of inflation without including food and fuel prices, which is where inflationary pressures start to show up first. Second, with the U.S. government borrowing all this money from the Federal Reserve to pay for its war, that's increasing the money supply. And that, too, causes inflation. So, yes, I'm afraid we are going into an inflationary cycle. We're going to be looking at much higher food and fuel prices, higher prices on everything. And that's going to be a hammer blow for people who are trapped in these low-paying jobs. Now, over in Russia, this sanctions war is really heating up. The Kremlin has apparently just passed a bill that makes it a criminal offense for anybody in Russia to comply with Western sanctions against Russia. That's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, but Russia and Europe are starting to push back. They're talking about counter sanctions. And that gets back to the comment I just made about if this continues to move forward, the U.S. is going to literally sanction itself into total isolation. Russian media is saying that most Russians aren't really feeling the U.S. sanctions anyway. Up in China, Beijing is saying that the anti-Russian sanctions aren't scaring Chinese investors away from dealing with Russia. Chinese investors are still going into Russia. They're setting up businesses. They're making investments. The commerce is still going on. Now, as you know, the U.S. has now, well, first of all, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. As you know, the U.S. has all of a sudden backed off the potential for a trade war with China. And they're starting to say, okay, we're not going to put tariffs on the smartphone handsets being made in China. We're already paying way too much for the iPhone X as it is. So the U.S. is now saying they're not seeking a trade war with China. In fact, they resumed talks on a new China trade deal. So we escaped that one here. Meanwhile, China has launched railway communications with Iran. And they did this despite the position of the United States, obviously, regarding Iran. And the U.S. is calling on companies to wrap up their interactions with Tehran. I think they've got 6 months here. But again, it's cutting the U.S. off from business in Iran. Everybody else is going to step in to fill that vacuum. This is a policy that can't work. Meanwhile, over in Tesla land, apparently staff are starting to leave Tesla as confidence in the company starts to falter. The share price is falling, and they have yet to deliver a game-changing car, although I thought it was already a game changer. I wouldn't mind. Part of the problem is Teslas are now bursting into flames. There was a violent crash in Switzerland. The car burst into flames, and it killed the driver trapped inside. So, story coming on out from Investment Research Dynamics. It's talking about how there's a debt powder keg, which we all know. And it looks like it's going to go on off. Now, Trump, as you know, had his tax cuts, mostly for the wealthy, and a little bit for middle-class America. But as we head into an inflationary spiral, we're seeing gas prices start to rise. They've risen close to 40% over the last year. And so any benefit from the tax cuts is eaten up by the increase in gasoline prices. So this highly promoted economic boost from the tax plan is actually a transfer payment from you to the oil companies. We're going to take a phone call now. Jesse in Utah. Aloha. Welcome, Jesse. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
You hear me? Hey, I just wanted to go back into what your previous caller was saying. You know, he was kind of theorizing that the government's orchestrated and they got this big plan going. I agree with you that the government's fractionalized, and, you know, obviously a lot of things that have happened in the past have, you know, built up to this. You could almost foresee it back then. We had people that warned us about it. What I wanted to say is, if there was an orchestrated plan, in my mind, the plan would be to, you know, as far as the UN goes, we break all the rules, so does Israel. Everybody, I mean, you look at all the nations in the world, they don't like us. And if there was a plan, it would be to make us look like a bunch of idiots and turn the world against us. There you go. There's your new world order right there.
Well, at some point, for the New World Order to come into being, the United States has to be brought down. But the globalists in the New World Order still need our military to whip all those other nations into line. So it would be too soon for such a plan to be.
But my point is, you know, us whipping them in line, you know, all this stuff, these stupid things we're doing, and anybody with a logical mind knows that it's just ridiculous. I mean, we're a bunch of frickin' tyrants. And the whole world sees it. And when the whole world gets together and says, you know what, we're sick of the United States, we're sick of Israel, and we ain't doing this anymore. And then that's all that needs to happen. They unite, and here they come. You know what I mean? That's just my theory, if there was a plausible theory, you know?
Well, yeah, we're starting to see the United States form a new axis, if you will, with Israel and Saudi Arabia, at least as far as the Middle East is concerned. And that's it's a critical situation here, because at some point, yeah, the rest of the world is going to say the United States is the problem. They're probably already saying that now. But at some point, they're going to say, if we continue to sit and do nothing, if we make the mistake that Neville Chamberlain did, if we go the path of appeasement, it's going to end very, very badly.
Yeah, and it reminds me of when I was a kid, and you'd hear, you know, everybody talking about the blue helmets coming. They're going to come to the United States. Well, there's a good reason for the blue helmets to come right there. You know, they could turn against us that quick. And I don't know, I guess that's just my theory. I think it's, you know, it's possible. I mean, a lot of things are possible, but holy cow, what I'm seeing is the whole world just turning against us, and it's a bad deal. We used to be looked up to, and now we're looked down on, you know, and it sucks. But
absolutely.
Anyway, I hope you have a great day, and thanks for letting me talk.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The problem is the blue helmets can't march into the United States of America until the gun grabbers succeed in disarming us all and getting rid of that Second Amendment, and they're not really having a lot of luck on that front. And one of the reasons Switzerland doesn't get invaded is everybody there has guns. More about that later in the show. Right now, there are 43 million people in the United States living in poverty. Let me rephrase that. There are 43 million legal citizens living in poverty. And there is now this, basically a march, if you will, called the Poor People's Campaign. It's a coalition of organizations led by Reverend Dr. William Barber II and Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. And they're basically going to march to Washington, D.C. on June 23rd. To basically emulate the historic march led by Martin Luther King Jr. 50 years ago, and demand that something be done about this economy, about the wealth inequality, about the war spending. And if enough people show up, they might have an impact. Because in his biography, Lyndon Johnson wrote that on the day when he looked out the Oval Office window and saw 1 million people protesting the war on the Mall, that was the moment he knew they had lost in Vietnam. Now, over at Russia Today, they have an article on how university economic theories are failing us all. And they start with a quote from John Maynard Keynes, who said, "When the facts change, I change my mind." But academia has a long tradition of fossilization. And a lot of what universities and colleges teach is often very much out of date. Now, clearly, the state of the economy is changing dynamically around the world. And if economists are being trained by colleges in an older way of thinking, then they're going to come on out with theories and policies that don't fit the modern world. And that is a problem. All right, I'm going to take another phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I don't think the UN's ever going to be able to do anything. Look at what that movie Hotel Rwanda, they didn't do squat, right? So
Right.
I can't say them really doing anything here. They're a joke, unless they come in and rape your women. Because weren't they doing that in, like, Sudan or somewhere like that? Like the UN peacekeepers, right?
Well, the
I think they're,
problem is,
molesting.
Yeah, the problem is the United Nations doesn't actually have an armed force. They just have boxes and boxes of helmets and armbands. And what they'll do is they'll basically borrow somebody else's army, which may be good or bad, and they'll send them into this other country. And yeah, the United Nations image has been much tarnished by all these stories of abuse of the indigenous civilians at the hands of the UN, supposed UN soldiers.
Yeah, I don't think the world looks down on us. I just think the world just looks away from us now. you know what I mean? Like, to look down on you is to be, I don't know. It's just all messed up, Mike, now. Like, it's just a joke. Like, the whole, hey, Mike, can the next president just, like, not, like, can he, like, close, like, the embassy in Jerusalem? You know what I mean?
Yeah, he could. But unfortunately, until we break the lock on our government that is held by the government of Israel, I don't see that happening. We're basically going to have to let this country collapse and then restart it. And one of the new rules we're going to have, along with no more private central banks, is no dual citizens allowed in the government. Other nations have laws like that.
And a lot of tar and feathers.
Yeah, lots of tar and feathers. Well,
you need that too. And Mike, I looked at like Ivanka, all dressed in the fancy. It's like the tale of two cities. These people live in a bubble. They're all on one side, all highly dressed and giggling it up. On the other, you see like shooting people in the head.
Yeah,
it blows my mind.
It is a lot like Tale of Two Cities. And not just
and Jared
Israel.
Kushner, I don't like him at all, Mike. He reminds me of a car salesman. He's a very slick operator, like
Yes.
Netanyahu, slick Willie too.
Yeah, but that parallel about Tale of Two Cities, that applies here in the United States. We have this incredible wealth disparity. We have these billionaires looking out their windows and sneering at people living at the edge of poverty. Turning their noses up because they don't like the smell of the sweat we've all worked up, making them rich.
Yeah, it's definitely, Tale of Two Cities, what a great book. Like, it just explains everything. Even the movie Metropolis, that explained Tale of Two Cities, right? Like, you had the workers down below under the ground, and you had all the people enjoying their fruits above the ground. It's just like now. And that movie was made, 1913 or 1923? I believe Metropolis, in the 20s in Germany.
Yeah, I think it was 1923.
And I wanted to switch real quick.
But before you leave that, if you ever get a chance to see the original uncut Metropolis, you would be amazed how much freedom they had back in Germany in 1923. There's actually a lot of nudity in that movie. It's all cut out, though, when it's broadcast on American TV because, we're not allowed to look at things like nipples.
I bought the Blu-ray version, the one that they found the footage in Brazil.
Yes.
They found a lot of different footage all around, and they pasted it together. And the footage is missing because it was damaged, so they would post-it, like, notes in there, to tell you what that scene was about because it was either too damaged, from over time. But I wanted to switch, Mike, on On Mike Pence, is Mike Pence like a evangelican? Like, is he believing that whole?
I really don't know. I don't know what his religion is.
Because it's like you get people calling. They're very like some of the people are like that one guy Dennis called. It was pretty religious and the end of the world. And you get people calling end times and this or that. I don't believe in any of that because they said that about World War I and World War II. This is the end of the world, and this is the end of the world. It's the end of the world comes when you die of leukemia from the blast or the blast. That's it. You know, like you don't want to push it to be the end of the world. You know, that's what some of these people believe, though, right? Like the evangelical, the Zionists, they believe to bring the end of the world to help God. Like it's a cult, like, right? I mean,
yeah, there are several religions that have that. Sarah Palin's church is one of those. They think that if they help set the world on fire, Jesus is going to come down and invite them all up to the big house. And you're right. History is filled with failed predictions for the end of the world. Anyway, listen, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Lisa in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello? Am I on?
You're on the air.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, okay, because it sounded like we had a little problem. Anyhow, first, I wanted to thank you for your thorough coverage of the Israel situation. You really painted a picture there with Ivanka, being all excited about this embassy thing at the same time the horrible stuff's unfolding. And on that note, I have a question, because I've heard this and I don't know much about it. I thought you might, about Israel's nuclear capabilities. I've heard of something called the Samson option. Have you heard of this, and could you explain it?
Yeah, basically the Samson option is an implied threat by Israel that if it's attacked, it's simply going to fire their nuclear weapons in all directions, and even to Europe. And this all goes back to one of the former leaders of Israel saying that Israel must be a mad dog so that people will leave us alone. And the strategy did work, because now all of the world sees Israel as a mad dog.
Wow. And then also the Ivanka situation with, whenever you just mentioned a little bit ago that she urged him to do the bombing, that didn't surprise me, because if you remember, the first time he did the Syrian bombings, from supposedly because of the children being gassed and all, she also urged him on that one.
Yeah.
Maybe I think it was Syria. Yeah, whenever they claimed that Assad was gassing his own people and the children and all, and she supposedly ran in and, told him how upset she was or whatever, and then he did it. So it's very upsetting, but I won't keep you. I just wanted to thank you. And thank you for clearing up. Absolutely, yes. And thanks for the Samson option. I never know what's true or false. And I just had a few minutes to look it up, and it looked true, but I just wasn't sure.
Well, here's the situation. Again, it's a double standard. Ivanka was out there saying how terribly upset she was about all those poor people who were hit with the gas attack, which turned out not to exist. But she's oblivious to all the people who were being killed in those missile strikes. And remember,
right.
They did a year ago, half those missiles went someplace else. They completely missed the intended target. But they sure as heck came down somewhere and probably killed a lot more civilians than were supposedly injured in that false flag gas attack. So, very duplicitous young lady. And the point is, you should remember this about Ivanka Trump in case she runs for office down the road, because we just got to look at her true nature.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking my call.
All right, thank you very much. The phone lines are now clear here. Getting on back to the economic news, a lot of people are saying California is in serious trouble. And nobody should be following California's example anymore. Wasn't all that long ago when California was supposed to be the heart of America's future. They had a huge economy there. They could be their own nation. It's all gone. They're bankrupt, they're in debt, massive unemployment, politicians and judges that just don't make any sense. It's liberal la-la land out there. The power grid is crumbling. The taxes are crippling. And they've got these sky-high real estate prices. And as a result, Californians are leaving the state. They're heading east to a better territory. And we need to take a close look at the relationship between liberal policies and the effect it has on government. Because you look at America's worst cities, they're all Democratic, liberal strongholds. And it's another reminder that liberalism is a failed concept, because they're always guided by what they dream could be rather than dealing with the reality of what actually is around them. Down in Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton is going to prosecute a Mexican woman charged with stealing an American citizen's identity and using it to cast ballots in 3 presidential election years. They caught one. Laura Janeth Garza was spotted after the American woman went to get a passport, only to have the State Department discover Ms. Garza had already gotten one in her identity. Federal officials alerted Texas, which conducted a probe, and found Ms. Garza illegally registered and cast ballots in 2004, 2012, and 2016. Now, I wonder who put her up to this. I wonder who went down to this person and said, steal an identity and vote illegally. I mean, the Democratic leadership has openly admitted they depend on illegals voting to hang on to power. The election laws be gosh darned. We'll be right back after this break. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And in response to that earlier phone call about Mike Pence, one of our listeners wrote on in, Pence describes himself as a born-again evangelical Catholic. So that basically settles that. Getting on over to Great Britain, the Democratic Unionist Party is talking about basically bringing down Prime Minister Theresa May because she continues to backtrack on Brexit. Is clearly not really all that dedicated to the idea, despite what the British people want. And basically, the Brexiteer told Julia Hartley-Brewer that the Prime Minister needs to be careful about backsliding on Brexit because the Democratic Unionist Party, along with pretty much the entire Tory benches, are getting frustrated. They want this to happen. This is supposed to happen. And apparently there are concerns that Theresa May is pushing for this trade-destroying customs partnership that nobody really wants. And it's already been figured out. This will cost Great Britain a huge amount of money. And that's what Brussels wants. The reason Brussels is fighting Brexit is they need to bleed the British taxpayers for money to prop up the rest of the EU. Because so far, under the predations of the European Central Bank, all those member nations are in trouble. And Germany and Great Britain have been carrying the load. And Germany's not going to want to do it alone. Meanwhile, Andrew Parker did a visit to Berlin and basically used terrorism and the Russian threat to basically say, give us some slack on Brexit. You know, we'd like to be focused on it, but really we got to deal with the terrorists first, and we got to deal with the Russians first. So it's going to take a while. It's not the top priority. And I can imagine the German people were probably chuckling at that one. Over in Hungary, George Soros Foundation is leaving in a huff because of the Hungarian government's Stop Soros bill brought in by the country's prime minister. To basically stop Soros from encouraging migrants to get on in there. Soros is describing the bill as repressive. But Europe is getting sick and tired of the migrant crisis. It is costing them money they do not have. It is causing conflict in the general population. Crime has gone through the roof. Communicable diseases have come back. So it's an ugly, ugly situation over there. Project Veritas, they've been doing a lot of good things. We reported yesterday on how those union officials in New Jersey who failed to report a sexual encounter between a teacher and a student have now been forced to resign from the union, and they're now facing the lawmakers over just what went on. And over in, let's see, Lakes, no, we already did this story here. I thought it was a different school. Project Veritas has released more undercover footage from inside teachers' union offices. Apparently, this is a nationwide campaign. The video features Nick Nugent, executive director of the South Oakland Districts Association for the Michigan Education Association, apparently violating Michigan child protection laws regarding mandated reporting. I don't know why somebody would have to mandate, reporting when a student has been sexually abused or abused in any way. I would expect people would want to do that. Anyway, this Nugent basically came on out and said, if we report it, you're going to get investigated, and I don't want to get you investigated. He was talking to the teacher who was guilty of the abuse. So what is going on with these unions? And I understand unions tend to think first about their union membership, but at some point you have to draw a line. We know that the police unions are always defending police who act inappropriately, who commit acts of violence or shooting, and that's across the line. Unions should confine their activity to contract negotiations and just stick with that. But when you obstruct justice, then you've committed a crime as well, whether it is not reporting on child sexual abuse at the hands of a teacher, or police officers who are basically shooting people who don't need to be shot. Now, I wanted to do this story. Oh no, we've got a caller waiting on the line here. Tom in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Tom, are you there?
Hello?
You're on the air, Tom.
John. Okay, I wanted to talk about a little bit about the North Korean nuclear program.
Yes.
Yeah. Donald Trump is taking credit for having them denuclearize. Is that right?
Well, yes, he is. Obviously, U.S. pressure was part of it, but a lot of the pressure came from China, who is North Korea's major trading partner. And China apparently called up Kim Jong-un and said, you've got to tone this down or there will be a war on the peninsula, and nobody is really going to be happy about that. But Trump is out there basically trying to take the complete credit for it all. But he had help from China.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Well, what I see on Google Maps and the last nuclear test he did, I think it collapsed the mountain and crushed his whole facility.
Well, it crushed the tunnels. But some of the tunnels are still operational. What they're going to do to shut that facility down is they're going to dynamite all the tunnels to close them, and they're going to dismantle all the support buildings that are located basically away from the actual test site.
Okay. I was just worried about that. I thought he came to say we're going to denuclearize because he lost all of his equipment and stuff.
Well, he lost the test site. He lost the test site, but obviously the uranium centrifuges and other processing and the fabrication facilities are still there. And by the way, Bolton is insisting that those all be dismantled and shipped to the United States as well.
Okay, I just wanted to say that little piece.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Anyway, I wanted to do this next story yesterday, being the day after Mother's Day, and it again shows just how wacko liberals have become, because now they're out there saying that Mother's Day is sexist, and you shouldn't use the word mother. In fact, somebody went so far as to print up cards that say Happy You Day, and the justification for this is that referencing the word mother is offensive to transgenders or transsexuals who are now women but cannot conceive, and it's hurting their little feelings. So it's ridiculous. And there's another story from the same category. This is over at Citizens Free Press, where over in Great Britain, liberals there want parents to ask toddlers for consent to change their diapers. Now that is utterly absurd. First of all, I imagine that if the toddlers had the intellect to be able to speak at such a young age, they'd say, heck yes, I don't like lying in this stuff. But it's absurd. The liberals have become a caricature of themselves. They don't make any sense at all. Over at the National Rifle Association, a lot of people are scratching their head over Oliver North being named the president of the NRA. And they're saying he's not a good fit. Now, obviously, when Charlton Heston was president of the NRA, he was a gun rights supporter, and he had celebrity star status. And maybe the NRA figured having Oliver North would bring with it a certain name recognition value. But they may have miscalculated, because anybody who knows about Oliver North understands that he had worked with the CIA to covertly import weapons to Iran as part of a scheme to illegally fund the CIA-created rebel force in Nicaragua. That whole Iran-Contra scandal, Oliver North was right in the middle of that. And they were using the Contras to overthrow the Nicaraguan government, pattern that we have seen time and time again all over the world. Oliver North played a major role in running drugs from Central and South America drug cartels into the U.S. as an additional means of funding the operation. This is all that stuff that was happening out of Mena, Arkansas, under then Governor Bill Clinton. Is everybody in the government a drug dealer, a drug runner, rather? So a lot of people are saying, why are we having a drug trafficker who was arming terrorists, gun running to terrorists? Now he's president of the NRA. I think it was a bad move. The optics are not good. I think it's going to be a PR disaster. In fact, ultimately, I think the gun grabbers are going to use this against the NRA. Look who they picked as a president. Boy, that just shows those gun nuts really are nuts after all here. Now, over in Switzerland, apparently Switzerland is in the crosshairs of this international gun control program. We're seeing it in countries all around the world, not just here in the United States of America. And basically, they are getting a demand from Brussels to disarm the Swiss people. Now, the Swiss have a long tradition of everybody having guns and everybody knowing how to shoot, and they don't want to give up their guns. Now, here's where it gets kind of tricky. Because of their long tradition of sovereign independence, Switzerland never joined the European Union. But they did sign the Schengen Open Borders Agreement, and Brussels is trying to claim that merely by signing the Open Borders Agreement brings Switzerland under Brussels' control. And I think Switzerland is going to tell them, no, we're not going to do that. Down in Texas, it really is just getting absurd. I look at stuff like this and it gets more and more absurd. Apparently, an autistic student in Texas was actually arrested for playing with an imaginary rifle. Fifth grade autistic student at Conroe Independent School District's Bozeman Intermediate School, 12-year-old David Sims, was just playing with an imaginary rifle. And apparently a teacher felt threatened by the imaginary rifle and called the police, who handcuffed this fifth grade student and took him into custody. And the parents weren't even notified until after the kid was already in jail at the police station. The kid was just playing. And apparently make-believe is now considered inappropriate behavior. Now, what they're trying to do is traumatize kids against guns. That's the reason for these unannounced live fire drills. that they have in the schools. It's not about dealing with a mass shooting incident. It's about scaring the heck out of the kids and giving them a negative emotional reaction to guns. And the reason we know this is look how the drills are different. When there's a fire drill, it's announced ahead of time, and you are told what you will do when you hear the fire alarm. When the fire alarm goes off, you will get up, you will go out that door, you'll go walk in this direction. That's how you do a drill, so that everybody knows what they're doing when it happens. These so-called mass shooting drills are unannounced. You just have a bunch of people showing up with guns with very loud blanks in them, running around the school and firing them, and just scaring the heck out of the kids. And it's to give them a negative association with guns, to traumatize them. So they grow up, and every time they see a gun, they wet themselves. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, I think yesterday you also talked about, American Made, the movie American Made.
Yes.
About Barry Hill. Well, that was only the tip of the iceberg. The best movie about that would be Kill the Messenger, about the late, great news reporter, Gary Webb, and what befell him. And in that movie, he brought out the fact that Holly North was basically bringing in drugs into the United States, was in charge of that. Also, if you read Roger Stone's book, the Bush crime family, well, they're connected, and also said that's how they were bringing the drugs in, and Holly North was one of the headmen, and actually ordered, Quentin Stone, he actually ordered the murder of, actually came from Bush, from George H.W., and he carried it out with Colombian hitman, the murder of Barry Seal. So what people have to know is this is just the tip of the iceberg for Iran-Contra. And what really happened is all these drugs coming to the United States pretty much were responsible for the crack epidemic we saw in the 80s and the 90s.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize that. I didn't realize that myself until I did research on it. I used to think Ollie North was a great man. I thought he was, a real American patriot. But, I have an open mind. I find things out, and when I get confirmation, when one thing adds up to another, I realize that this guy was really a dirtbag. And
yep.
I think the NRA should be ashamed what they're doing, making him the head of the NRA. They're giving. You're right. They're giving ammunition to the enemy, to the anti-gun enemy. Because I'm all for the. I'm big in the Second Amendment. I mean, that's non-compromising to me. And so-called assault weapons, to me, those are the weapons needed if the government becomes too tyrannical and tries to really suppress the people. And so I'm all for, but this is a bad guy to have stand up for that. It really is. And it's because, like I said, you think of the harm, the crack epidemic. I was a law enforcement officer at that time in New York. We had over 2,000 murders in New York City a year for a few years. It was mostly because of the crack epidemic. Okay, and I've seen two guys gunned down. I got called down to it was a 1013, and officers respond, and I went down to the and it was right on the street, right. I was a court officer. It was right in front of the courthouse where it happened. We were the ones who responded because we were closest by, and I saw two young black men, probably in their teens, bleeding out from a drive-by shooting. It was all crack related because that whole neighborhood was completely overrun by crack. So I personally had friends of mine that were actually turning into crackheads, and it was decent people before. So I don't forget stuff like that.
No, I don't either. I remember when I was living in North Hollywood, it was just all over the place. It really was. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I finally got a clarification on what's going on with North Korea. North Korea has called off the talks with South Korea over the U.S.-South Korean military drills and is now threatening to call off the meeting with Donald Trump. And had Trump really wanted to talk to North Korea, it would have been wise and prudent to just delay the military drills, which North Korea sees as practicing for an invasion of North Korea. So I did mention at some point, the U.S. does not want a reunified Korea, and they're going to find some way to mess this up. And all they had to do was start sailing their ships back and forth just off the coast of Korea, and that's exactly what happened. And I think Moon Jae-in got snookered. Remember, they called off the drills back during the Olympics to try and ease tensions down. And it was all going in a good direction. Now it's all gone out the window. By the way, a reader wrote in to remind you, Trump's executive order regarding the Petro is not legally binding on anybody outside the federal government. Because all an executive order is effective on is the administration, the executive branch, in fact. It's an order by the president, go out and do this. We, the American people, are not subject to executive orders. So it's important to keep that in mind when you see executive order this and executive order that. They're not legally binding on the American people. Two of the memes that have been promoted over the past few years is that there's a war on police and that there is an escalating incidence of police brutality against black people, including deaths. The numbers are now in, and it turns out neither one of these assertions is true. Last year, the U.S. experienced a fall in the number of police deaths, and apparently the number of black people being assaulted by the police is way down because of the adverse publicity. In fact, far more white people are being abused and killed unnecessarily by the police than black people. Now, if you have BBC America, you've probably been seeing the commercials, just saturated commercials. The royal wedding is coming up. The royal wedding is coming up. Huzzah, 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 huzzah. And as it turns on out, there's a reason for all the advertising. Because polls are showing that a majority of Britons just aren't interested in Harry and Meghan's upcoming wedding at St. George's Chapel, which is coming up here in 4 days. They're not interested. A lot of Britain is starting to really sort of move away from the idea of a royal family. Now, you need to understand the royal family are very wealthy. They don't actually have any power and authority. There are some formal rituals that they go through for tradition's sake. When a new prime minister is elected, he has to go to the Queen and get her permission to form a new government, which is always given. But they're starting to cool on their ardor for all things royal. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And getting on back to Great Britain, once again, Sergei Skripal's niece has been denied a visa by Britain to visit her relatives. And more people are thinking that the Skripals are being held incommunicado because what they have to say about what happened doesn't match that official story. And it has vanished completely from all the British newspapers. A lot of people assume that a D notice has been issued on this. That's a law they have in Great Britain, where the government can and does tell the newspapers, you will not report on this or that particular story. Okay, now let me get this up here, and we'll be ready to continue with the rest of the show. Too many buttons here. I got too much to do. Getting on back to liberal la-la land, a lot of parents are very upset. Apparently, Hanover Park High School, like every other high school, they're in East Hanover, New Jersey, they have cheerleading squads. And like every other school, they have tryouts. And they will pick, obviously, pretty agile, physically fit young ladies to be on the cheerleading team. And then some local liberals came on out there and say, well, those girls who don't make the team, they're feeling left out. For the sake of inclusivity, you have to let anybody who wants to join the cheerleaders join the cheerleaders. And the school went along with this. What's it going to be next? Letting guys on the cheerleading team? Actually, there have been male cheerleaders. We had old story. But a lot of parents are very upset about this because we're supposed to be encouraging a desire to excel in children, to be more athletic, to be out there, to be the best at what you're doing. And when you all of a sudden take that incentive away, the kids are going to just give up. Why should I try to be better at math than everybody else if everybody's going to get a degree anyway? Why should I try and be a better musician if the orchestra has to let in the bad musicians for the sake of inclusivity? This is a very, very bad direction to be going. And we have to stop giving into the snowflakes, because the more we give into them, the more they're going to want. And look how absurd it has already gotten. With Mother's Day is not inclusive, therefore we should not use the word mother anymore. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Dennis in Indiana. Aloha, Dennis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was just wondering, maybe I heard about this book called The Great Deception, and it's got some other little bit of a title to it. I don't know who the author is, but it's supposed to be telling about what what's going on with our government and deep state and stuff like that. And I was wondering, maybe if you weren't interested, Claire might be interested in looking up. You can look up Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, California, with Mike Wilkerson as the pastor. Then you might be able to find out where that book could be ordered from, or whatever. Read up on what's it called, and read up on about it. They're supposed to be talking about our government and the deep state and all that. They're in of the deception that our government's been pulling across, pulling the wool over our eyes for the last 56 years.
Well, I did a web search for it, and unfortunately there are a lot of books and videos called The Great Deception. I'm going to have to narrow it down, but I'll try and find it. But a lot of this stuff that is likely to be in the book is what we've been covering on my website and the radio show for the last 24 going on 25 years.
Yeah, it's just a new book that I heard. I couldn't hear the list, the title, and I just know some woman named Jen had something to do with it.
Well, I'm not familiar with the book, so I really cannot tell you. Okay, anything else?
Okay, no, that's all.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And, boy, it's a tough time for airliners. Apparently there was a flight to China. One of the cockpit windows blew out completely and almost sucked the pilot out of the plane. And I don't know who made that aircraft or who was maintaining it, but they're cutting safety too short. There's no question about that at this point. Meanwhile, a Southwest airline plane was forced to make an emergency landing Saturday when the cabin started losing pressure, and the plane is now undergoing a maintenance review. This was on Flight 861 from Denver to Dallas, and there were more than 100 passengers on board. And around, one of the passengers said the oxygen mask came down. Passengers were told to put them on because the cabin was losing pressure. And this happened just 30 minutes outside Dallas at that point. Now, speaking of airplanes, for some reason, somebody decided it was time to put Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 back into the news. Now, if you remember, this is the airplane that just simply vanished over the ocean, and they're still out there trying to come up with explanations. So over at the Daily Mail, they have this article, how MH370 pilot avoided being detected by radar for hours to ensure the plane was never found, as aviation experts claim he committed mass murder-suicide. They had the same excuse for the Egyptair Flight 880 when that was taken down under suspicious circumstances. Now remember, there was a report from workers on an oil platform right underneath where the MH370 transponder stopped working, and they said it looked like it accidentally got shot down, and there was a joint Thai-U.S. military exercise in the area, and it's not like the U.S. hasn't accidentally shot down planes before, like the Iranian airliner or TWA 800. But they're still out there saying, yeah, he just flew the plane, evaded the radar, he didn't want the plane to be found. If he's committing suicide, why would he care if the plane was found or not? And if he wanted to commit suicide, he would have just put the plane into a nosedive. This story is nonsense. Now, if in fact the plane was not shot down in a military accident, and by the way, the United Nations says this has happened 26 times, most of which remain highly classified, then it makes sense this pilot had a destination in mind. And when this first happened, and there was no sign of the aircraft, I speculated that because spare parts for this model aircraft are in such short supply, that it may have been hijacked. They may have paid this flight crew, to basically get on up there at altitude, depressurize the cabin to put everybody to sleep, and then fly the plane somewhere where it was simply stripped and the parts put on the world spare part market. That's one possible explanation. But this story doesn't make any sense. If he's committing suicide, why not a nosedive? If he's committing suicide, why does he care if the plane is ever found or not? And why did they even bother putting this out there? Is some other piece of information about Flight 370 about to hit the news cycle? Okay, let's take another phone call. Glenn in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. This is just a little switching topic, and bear with me for just a minute. There's a good point here. I used to work for a company, the Ken Blanchard Companies. It was a management training development company that worked with all the big American Express, Microsoft, Apple, etc., and training the management to support their teams. And, it's really good programs. Anyway, after 9/11, the company took a huge hit, and they were facing possible layoffs. But what they did is they took a vote and decided that everybody over a certain income would take like a 20% pay cut so they didn't have to do any layoffs. And they managed to bring the company back to profitability within a few years. Then after that, they had profit sharing for everyone in the company. Every year you got to check based on how much profit the company made. Now, I think this is something that would really be a great idea for the blueprint for the new America. Abolish a personal income tax under a certain income threshold, and this engaged everybody at the company in improving it, getting it better. And you mentioned the Russian surplus, the goods and services GDP of the company or the country can be shared back with the people. And this, that's kind of the way a universal basic income would be rephrased as more of a profit sharing idea. Does that make sense?
That's an interesting thought. That is a very interesting thought. First of all, when I hear universal basic income, to me that says communism. And there was the question, how would you pay for it? The fly in the ointment, first of all, is that when communism was in the Soviet Union, because everybody was getting paid the same and everything was political, it kind of dispirited the Russian people. And there were some people who went on out there who wanted to excel just for the sake of excelling. But for the most part, things went along very, very slowly. and it's one of the reasons why the Soviet Union eventually collapsed. I think we need to have a system where hard work and innovation is rewarded more highly than people who just want to sit at home and watch TV. We need to have an incentive system. What we have now is a system where all of the work product produced by the people are basically scammed away from us by Wall Street and the bankers. And we can't have that system either. So we have to find another way of moving forward and ultimately getting back to the idea of a state bank versus a private central bank is what makes the most sense. We need to just go back to the economic model our country was started with, because that worked. And it made the young United States of America very quickly into a wealthy nation able to do business with the rest of the world. But then we've had these three private central banks, and all three of them caused a huge amount of economic damage to ordinary people. That's why Congress refused to renew the charter for the first Bank of the United States. That's why Andrew Jackson shut down the second Bank of the United States. And it's why we really do need to get rid of the third Bank of the United States, otherwise known as the Federal Reserve.
That is definitely the root of the issue. I absolutely agree 100%. Yes. I just think that it's a good idea. You know, when you have major corporations paying a $500 fee to a state like California to suck all the water out of an aquifer, you know, that's a resource that belongs to the people, the citizens of the country. And, you know, when you look at it as profit sharing rather than a universal basic income, it does remove that stigma of socialism that was, you know, kind of really set on fire during the McCarthy era, etc. So, you know, it's just something to put out there. I think it's a great idea that the people of the country get to share in the wealth of the country. And I know that there are some countries, you know, Russia may start doing that. You kind of gave me that idea when you told that story. So,
well, obviously the people should share the wealth that their labor produces, and that's the way it's supposed to work in a healthy republic. But again, our nation has sunk into an incredible pit of corruption, where everything produced by the American people is taken away from them, either through debt slavery or taxation, and it's all to feed Wall Street, greed, and the war machine. Anyway, Glenn, we're going to let you go, and we're going to switch over now to Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, I was going to speak about the MH370 preposterous, absurd, delusional conclusion that somebody could be a mass suicide. It might be a homicidal maniac committing mass murder. Perhaps he was committing suicide himself, although most likely he was a weaponized human pilot sent on a mission, maybe a kamikaze Zionist pilot, perhaps, or Islamist or Muslim, and we don't know who he was. But to insinuate that somebody could commit suicide on 200 or 300 other people is a bizarre interpretation, in my estimation. What say you?
Yeah, that's a very oddly written headline. And again, why did this come out now? There's so much going on in the world. It's not like the involved news organization was desperate for material. I mean, they could always go back to Stormy Daniels if they wanted to. So that's why I was asking, is there something else that's about to come on out and they're trying to get ahead of it? Because it makes no sense that they would report on this now, especially with such an obviously bogus story.
Well, when we look at their pattern, practice, and custom and tradition of habitually, serially deflecting, reflecting, or causing us to look over there while they do something over here, which is usually their pattern and practice, I think it worthy of paying close attention by the people of the world to watch over what they're doing and what comes next, or more likely it's what's really going on underneath the undertones that they don't want us to be aware of. Perhaps the incarceration, the prosecution of Hillary Clinton gang and her sycophant pedophile groups that she's in cahoots with, and the other global pedophile terrorists that are preying upon the children, the innocents of the world, sex trafficking and human trafficking, even in organs. This is just so diabolical, insidious, and preposterous, and just an affront to normal people's common sense. How can we even tolerate this debauchery and insanity?
Well, let me back up here a little bit, because if you think this story about MH370 is meant as bait to distract us away from something else, it's a poor choice of bait, because for most people, Flight 370 is history, and they've stopped really caring about it. So it's a niche interest group at best. The only reason I put it up here in the talking points was that it was such an obviously bogus story. Anyway, listen, Chris, thanks an awful lot for the call. We're going to let you go here. Get on back to news, because now it's time to talk about human-caused global warming. As you know, we had a lot of snow this last winter. Snow records were being broken all over the continent. And so it should come as no surprise that historic flooding has hit British Columbia now that the snowpack is starting to melt. And basically, Grand Forks, the flood is the worst since 1948, and things are not over yet. Major flooding hit British Columbia, forcing about 4,000 people to evacuate their homes. So they're out there saying the spring flood season is upon us. And again, just like we question people who build their homes on the south flank of a volcano, shouldn't be surprised when lava comes through their living room. If you're building in a flood zone, you're going to get floods. But people are forced to build there for economic reasons. Land values are much less expensive there. And certainly in terms of the Big Island of Hawaii, land prices are going to be really, really good for the foreseeable future down there. So Tucker Carlson was interviewing Dr. Judith Curry, who's a climate scientist, basically saying that the models that the global warming people use are completely wrong. And they're exaggerating the data, which we have been telling you all along. And one of the more frustrating things about dealing with one of the carbonazis is you'll say, look out the window at the snow, look at the thermometers, and you'll actually get this reply back. Oh, we're not actually relying on real-world observations. We rely on the computer models to tell us what's going on. Well, if those computer models are wrong, you're going to get wrong results. And that is why over these last several years, consistently, the dire warnings of the global warming cult have failed to materialize. Now, as I reported yesterday, we just went through the most drastic 2-year drop in global temperature in the last century. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I just got an email from a listener saying, well, if you're going to have ugly cheerleaders on the cheerleading squad, have them cheer for the opposing team. So let's talk about our volcano, because it is still volcanoing. And there is now a 19th fissure out there, and it's spewing lava literally hundreds of feet into the air, and there's no sign of it slowing down. And now up at the summit, there's starting to be ash emissions. In fact, I just posted a video that was taken of it, and the ash cloud is rising 3,000 to 4,000 feet above the ground. The altitudes vary with the pulses of emission. And the ash cloud is drifting generally west and southwest from the Kilauea summit, which is following the trade winds. And the ash fall is occurring in the Kau Desert area, where fortunately there's nobody living down there for very, very good reason. But there are some communities that are downwind that are likely receive ashfall today, and they have to take the necessary precautions. Now, one of the precautions people are doing is they're going to their local hardware stores and they're getting these paper masks that are normally used for painters and other people working in a dusty environment. But Hawaii authorities are cautioning everybody, these masks will not keep out the sulfur dioxide. So, pardon me, if you're dealing with the ash, definitely have that. But if you're concerned about the sulfur dioxide, you need to look for something a little bit more robust in terms of filtration. And at this point, the stores may be out of that anyway. everybody's gone to the store to get masks and supplies that they get. Right now, there's a new lava eruption, and it threatens to block the last escape route from down on that southern flank. We talked about this the other day, where we had the U.S. military having helicopters on standby to get people out. Frankly, I know a lot of people are ignoring the evacuation orders. It is a dumb thing to do. You just have to take what you can and leave. And then when it's all over, you come back, and either your house is still there or it is not. But you don't risk yourself. And the people who've stayed behind, if that lava crosses that road, there is no other land route out of that part of the southern flank. And it's a serious situation. Kilauea is starting to affect Hawaii's tourism business, and apparently some of the cruise ships we have operating here are starting to cancel their stops at the Big Island. Norwegian Cruise Line's Pride of America skipped a call on the Big Island port of Hilo, which is just 43 miles from the now mostly closed national park that encompasses the volcano. Instead, the ship remained anchored at sea. Norwegian also announced the Pride of America would skip a call at Kailua Kona, which is on the other side of the Big Island, scheduled for Thursday. I can understand Hilo. Kailua Kona is really quite far away from all of the action, as it were. But the thinking may simply be that Norwegian Cruise Lines doesn't want to accept the liability if one of their passengers does something dumb and gets killed. Royal Caribbean has dropped a call in Hilo and for its Radiance of the Seas. So there's a big effect, and on top of everything else, the Big Island's tourism economy is going to take a major hit. And it's kind of ironic because that volcano is one of the biggest tourist attractions in the entire state. And certainly on the Big Island itself. Volcanologists are now very concerned that the lava coming out of Kilauea may soon get a lot hotter and spew much further, because the lava that is now coming on out from those fissures is thought to have been basically stored in lava tubes going back to a 1955 eruption, which tells you how long it takes this stuff to cool. But because it has cooled a little bit, it's formed crystals of olivine. It moves very, very slowly. You've been seeing it on TV, like that time-lapse film of the volcano eating that Mustang car. But it's now thought that hotter and much more liquid lava is now flooding into those tubes from Kilauea. And if that starts coming out of the fissures, it's going to be a much more serious situation to deal with. Scientists are still very concerned about the possibility of an explosive eruptive event that may exceed a blowout that happened in 1924. And all we can do is wait and see about that. And it's a waiting game. You know it's coming, you just don't know when. So, tremendous sympathies for those people down in the Big Island. And I really got a lot of borderline abusive emails saying, why were they living down there? Well, because it is beautiful. And relative to Hawaii, it's inexpensive. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're finishing up here with the volcano situation. And again, all we can do is wait and see what's going to happen, and do the best. Obviously, get those people out of the way. But that's what you get with a volcano. Now, all the attention's focused on Kilauea, but the reality is there are a lot of volcanoes in the United States. Right now, the U.S. Geological Survey has a total of 169 volatile volcanoes across the western U.S., Hawaii, and Alaska. And the volcanoes have been active to varying degrees over the years. But obviously Kilauea has reminded people that, yes, these things can cut loose. I remember very clearly when Mount St. Helens went, and it just blew out the side of the volcano and showered ash literally all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Apparently 50 of the volcanoes listed by the USGS are thought to be nearing eruption. Now, when Claire and I lived in Washington State, of course, we went on down and looked at the remains of Mount St. Helens, and there was this little museum on an overlook looking into the crater. And I found out that because the bulge in the center of the crater is starting to build up again, they actually relocated that museum much further away. Probably a wise and prudent thing to do. Let's talk about the world of computers and computing right now. Facebook has revealed that it's removed 2.5 million pieces of hate speech. So this is it. They got everybody corralled into using their social media, and now comes the censorship. And the problem with that, first and foremost, is what one person sees as hate speech, another person might not. It's purely subjective. And Facebook hasn't really clarified what it means by hate speech. I'm going to take a wild guess here that probably criticism of Israel is considered hate speech, because Israel is pushing that idea that any criticism of the actions of the government of Israel represents anti-Semitism, which is silly. That's like saying the only reason people criticize the Nazis is they hate the German people. But Facebook is out there with their little kill switch. They're not afraid to use it. 2.5 million pieces of hate speech. I wish they would spend less time controlling what we read and more time on their security, because apparently 3 million Facebook users have been exposed in a new data leak, including the results of personal psychological profiles. And a lot of people don't understand this, but Facebook basically tries to build a psych profile of all of their users simply by what they read and what they post. And I imagine they make this information available to marketing companies and on request to the United States government. But apparently the issue tracks back to an actual personality app, personality test. And the quiz called My Personality collected highly sensitive data, including psychometric test results that reveal how neurotic or extrovert an individual may be. Why on earth would you type that into a computer hooked to the internet? It's amazing. Over in Great Britain, there's concern being raised over the fact that there's this online figure who goes by the name Philip Cross, and seems to have a full-time job editing Wikipedia, targeting anti-war and non-mainstream UK figures by editing their Wikipedia pages, to the point that George Galloway is offering a reward for this person's true identity. And this guy, or whoever it is, could be a girl, has been active on Wikipedia since 2004 and has been editing wiki entries for nearly 15 years. And trouble has been brewing online, with Cross accused of paying special attention to a cluster of Wikipedia accounts, editing them or deleting chunks of information. Now, one of the problems with Wikipedia is they let anybody edit the pages. And a lot of information basically does get erased. When the global warming hysteria was first cranking up, some of the people who were on board with Al Gore were editing the Wikipedia pages for the medieval and Roman warming periods to make it look like there wasn't a big deal there. So you have to be very, very careful. Now, years and years ago, there were actually Wikipedia entries for Michael Rivero and whatreallyhappened.com. And somebody went on into the article about me and edited it to basically say I'm a Jew hater and an anti-Semite. So I went back on in and edited the article to basically put it back to its original form. Then a day later, the Jew hater anti-Semite was back in there, so I tried to edit it to correct it again, and I was blocked. And the reason I was blocked is that Wikipedia stated that Michael Rivero was not a recognized expert on the subject of Mike Rivero. So I went public with it on my website, and Wikipedia deleted both pages, and that was the end of that. Now, there is some good information on Wikipedia. Science, technical information, engineering, that kind of stuff. But if it's political or if it's controversial, you absolutely cannot trust it. Because everybody with a political agenda is going on in there and re-editing the articles to basically push whatever their agenda is. So you have to be careful. Now, over at Google, they have an AI that is so good that it's able to fool humans. Apparently, it can pass the Turing test, and as a demonstration, Google had this AI make phone calls to various people and interact with them. And it's designed to sound like it's a human being. It even goes and taking little pauses to complete the illusion here. And not one of the people on the other ends of those phone lines realized they were talking to a machine. And it was apparently supposed to be a stunning reminder of just how good Google is. But it's backfired a little bit. So this AI, which is named Duplex, basically a lot of people said this is very, very concerning, that this could be misused for abusive phone calls to people or interactive telemarketing instead of a pre-recorded message. And Google has now stated that this AI will identify itself as a robot when making phone calls to humans. There was a huge, huge backlash on that one. There are now 7 Chrome extensions spreading through Facebook that are stealing passwords. You've got to be very, very careful what you add to your browsers. There's a lot of cybercrime out there and very little interest by the U.S. government in stopping any of it. It's like open season on the American people. So, according to a report published by Radware, malware operators are using copies of legitimate Google Chrome extensions and injecting a short, obfuscated, malicious script into them to bypass Google's extension validation checks. And once installed, the extension executes a malicious JavaScript code that makes victims' computers part of a botnet. So if your computer seems to be churning and grinding a lot, you might want to look into it. The 7 extensions masquerading as legitimate extensions are Nigilify, Punerlake, PWNER like, Alt-J, Fixcase, Divinity 2 Original Sin Wiki Skill Pop-Up, Keep Private, and iHabno. Now, Google has removed all the above listed extensions, and if you've installed any of them, you're advised to immediately uninstall them and change passwords for your Facebook, Instagram, as well as for other accounts where you are using the same credentials. And I know it's a major inconvenience, but you should not be using the same password everywhere that you go. Because once they get the password for one account, then by default they have the password for them all. And I know it's difficult keeping track of all the passwords. Do not use one of those online password systems where they'll log you in automatically because, again, that's giving the passwords away online. I just use an Excel spreadsheet for all of my passwords. And I advise you to do that too. Have a file or an Excel sheet or a notepad file, whatever, on your own computer. Keep all of your account and password information there, and you can get to it when you need it. Now, the Electronic Frontier Foundation has won a victory over a troll patent. And this patent troll was called Personal Audio LLC. And it started this lawsuit back in 2013 by suing comedian Adam Carolla and was threatening a bunch of other podcasters. Personal Audio claimed that the podcasters infringed their patent 8112504, which described a system for disseminating media content in serialized episodes. That's how troll patents work. It's an overly broad definition. The Patent Office no longer requires you to actually come up with an invention or prove that the idea will work. So you can patent any idea that you want. Now, the Electronic Frontier Foundation challenged the podcasting patent at the Patent Office in October of 2013. They won that proceeding. It was affirmed on appeal, and Personal Audio LLC took it all the way to the United Supreme Court, asking for them to review it, and the Supreme Court rejected it. So the case is finally over. And patent trolls are a major problem for technology. If you're a fan of the TV series Silicon Valley, they've run afoul of a couple of them. And amazingly enough, in the early years of computer animation, somebody actually tried to patent the concept of anti-aliasing, which would have required everybody doing computer animation or creating computer animation software or display devices to pay them a royalty. Fortunately, that one was also tossed out of court. But it's a very predatory situation. And it illustrates how the Patent Office has sort of become less than it used to be, because in the early days of the Patent Office, your patent had to be specific about what was being patented, and you had to provide a model of what it was you were patenting. Now, there was a huge fire at the patent building, and all the models got melted together. In fact, apparently there's a lobby display in the current Patent Office building of those very carefully crafted models all blended together. But more and more recently, the Patent Office is accepting patent applications that are not clear and specific, but overly broad, like the one from this company. Okay, the co-founder of Google's DeepMind program, Demis Hassabis, is out there saying that self-driving cars are dangerous and that testing them on public roads right now is irresponsible because the technology just isn't there. And we have already had some issues with self-driving cars getting into accidents. And I agree. These things, we have too many products that are put out there that are not fully developed. But everybody's in a rush to get to market and to make money. And they'll fix it later. And in this case, people's lives are involved. So, now over at the Ecuadorian Embassy in London, things are starting to look bad for Julian Assange. We reported earlier that the Ecuadorian Embassy had basically cut off Julian Assange's communications. No visitors, phone call, no internet. They were getting complaints from foreign governments that Assange's posts were interfering in these nations' internal affairs. And I can imagine probably one of the biggest complaints came from the United States, which wants to get their hands on Julian Assange. And now we are hearing the Ecuadorian Embassy may hand Julian Assange over to British and U.S. authorities. Now, right now, Assange is a citizen of Ecuador, so the legalities are somewhat complex. But the fact of the matter is, the instant Assange steps out of that embassy to try and get to the airport, he's going to be picked up. And a lot of people are very, very concerned that he's at the very least going to go to prison for a very, very long time, if not outright assassinated. Twitter is also ramping up their censorship of hate facts. And again, no clear definition of what that is. But from the accounts that are being shut down for too many strikes against them, again, it's clear. One of the definitions of hate facts is any criticism of the government of Israel, which is one of the reasons why I don't use Twitter anymore. This next piece is a very scary story. This came out of consortiumnews.com. Apparently, there is actually a bill under consideration in the Senate that could allow Donald Trump to indefinitely jail American citizens without charge if they oppose U.S. military action. This from Marjorie Cohn. Now, under the guise of exercising supervisory power over the president's ability to use military force, Congress is considering writing Trump a blank check to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens with no criminal charges whatsoever, just for opposing the wars. This legislation could permit the president to lock up Americans who simply dissent against U.S. military policy, which would obviously include Claire and I. We're going to take a phone call. Paul in Delaware, I'm probably going to have to take you over the commercial break. What's on your mind?
How you doing? Is this Mike Rivero?
Yes, it is.
Hi, how you doing? I've heard a lot of your work. This is the first time I called into your show, though. So check this out. I just wanted to talk about that wall real quick because it's a pressing issue, as well as Donald Trump and the stuff that's going over in Gaza. And as far as this thing, as far as what Donald Trump's going to do to American citizens, I think that, if you're going to lay around and let it happen, stop crying about it, is what I would suggest to people. If that's all you can do is cry, and, I got a radio show too, right? And, what I said in my show is different. In the sense is, it's just too much. It's just too much information. It's just too much about the chosen people. It's just too much.
Okay,
and
Paul,
of course,
Paul, I got to put you on hold. Don't go away. We got 3 minutes worth of commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. We're talking with Paul in Delaware. And Paul, could you just sort of continue on where you left off? Paul, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
Yes,
you're on the air. Could you just sort of continue where you left off?
Yes, sir. So I wanted to share with you before I went on is that I got an opportunity to call into the Sean Hannity show today. I didn't even know that I was calling into it, right, because we have a local radio station that somehow connected into it. And so when I got on, I said, this sounds like Sean Hannity. But anyway, what I want to tell you is this. I started off, and I'm going to tell you what I also told him because I wanted to share that with you also. And the reason why is because you have a large listenership that really needs to hear what I'm saying. And I was telling him about how, mainly the liberals and things like that are going around looking for Confederate statues and pulling down monuments and flags and everything else. And they haven't figured out that it is the chosen ones that run our media that it didn't come from the bottom up. This is some stuff from the top down. Every single time, it's always from the top down. No one except the intelligent people. I learned this a long time ago. Only intelligent people will ever start revolution. The slower class will never. And unfortunately, that's why I guess nothing gets done with them and why anyone with intelligence somehow always sells out to them. But here's what I told Sean Hannity. They're going around getting all these statues, but they keep on missing the one because they keep on using dog whistle words like racist, Ku Klux Klan, Nazis. But then if they're looking for Klan members, because they're always, even though I don't see any real Klans that are really effective, they always go and, bring up Klan. Well, I just suggested that, look, just take a look at this. Isn't it coincidental that they're running around looking for Confederate generals, but they missed the one that's in Washington, D.C., Albert Pike, the man who started the Ku Klux Klan. And, of course, he's a Confederate general. And, of course, somehow they miss this guy every time they want to talk about Confederate generals, even though he should be one of the main ones because he was also the sovereign grand commander of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. But somehow, of course, how come? Don't be dumb. It's because he's a Jew, and the Jews are the ones putting fuel to this fire. They want us to go and
hang on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let me remind you all of the policy of this program is we don't paint with a broad brush. We don't talk about the Jews, the blacks, the Hispanics. We talk about individuals like, for example, in this case, George Soros and his plans for a global government and a new world order, part of which is the suppression of regional, cultural, and historic identity. And so you got to stay within the rules here. We talk about individuals. We talk about the government of Israel. We talk about Soros. We don't go the Jews this and the Jews that. That is absolutely forbidden on this show.
Yeah, that I understand that, and I can respect that.
But you know, as I'm hearing that, I would also say when I look at Antifa, because whenever we see the black bloc come out, once again, if you go look at videos where it says Antifa unmasked and you compile them like I have, you'll notice that it's one group of certain ethnic individuals that want to hide behind the mask. So it's kind of hard to know every one of their names.
Paul, okay. We got to let you go. We're at the end of our program. There's the music, so thank you for the phone call. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got all kinds of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Use email, use face-to-face contact. Try and get other people to share this information as well. We're up, stay off of social media. It's completely controlled and filtered right now. It's utterly useless for the American people right now, unless you're really big on kitten videos. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.